Hello and welcome to Tabletop Oddity. My name is Jay and today I'm going to be running through 3 different kinds of basic basing which I think are suitable for Star Wars Legion. Mainly we're going to do like a foresty Endor kind of one, we'll do like a desert suitable for like Tatooine, and we'll do a snow base suitable for like Hoth or what have you. And yeah, if you think you might like this, do hit the subscribe button, that really does help. But we'll quickly run through all 3 of those and then I'll be back at the end. So to start with, we need to get some sand on our base. Now what I'm actually going to use here is super glue for pretty much everything. However, PVA is a lot easier to work with. The downside is that it does take a lot longer to dry. So anyway, we're doing the Endor one first. And you're going to cover your entire base. Now the bases I'm using are actually Games Workshop bases. I'm just using those for demonstrating purposes. But you, as I said, you could definitely use PVA. If you do any larger rocks on your base, then super glue is actually good for that. But you know, cover your base in either PVA or super glue. I actually recommend PVA because I got super glue all over my hands. And then I'm going to sprinkle some small rock just for detail. This is before I'm going to dip it in sand. This is just sort of like random sized grit. Once you've done that, then we're going to get our sand and we're just going to dip the whole thing in the sand. Now if you've used PVA, you do need to fully wait for it to dry. But because I've used super glue, it will literally only take like 20 minutes to dry. Now that technique there of putting on our PVA / super glue, putting on our grit, and then dunking it in the sand is the same thing I'm going to do for all 3. The only thing I do slightly different for the Hoth one is I glue on a slightly larger rock, but that's neither here nor there. So once you've done your base, or however many bases you want, we're going to start painting it. Now, I find you don't really need to prime your bases. Your models you need to prime, but for your bases, not really. And the colour that I'm going to use for our Endor one, well, that is Steel Legion Drab from Games Workshop. I'm pretty much using all GW stuff here. You can use other alternative colours. It's literally just, in this case, a dark brown, and then a wash, and then lighter browns. So yeah, we cover it in Steel Legion Drab. Let that dry, of course. Once that is dry, I'm going to cover it with Agrax Earthshade. Because I found the Steel Legion Drab to not be quite as dark as I wanted, I just wanted to darken it up, and Agrax Earthshade was an easy way of doing that. It's a wash that gets into all the crevices, or they sometimes call it a shade, but basically it gets into all the crevices and makes the darkest points darker and leaves the lighter points. You let that dry, and then we're going to move on to the dry brushing. So in this case, I'm going to dry brush initially with the original colour of Steel Legion Drab. Now if you don't know what I mean by a dry brush, it's like you can get specific brushes, but like use a tattered or an old brush for this. You don't really want to be using your new brushes because this is literally like sandpaper. But what you want to do, you want to get the paint in your brush, get it all in your brush, and then you want to try and get it off your brush using like some tissue or something. And the idea being here is that you've got like only a little bit on the end of your brush, so that when you lightly gently go all over your base, it's not getting in those recesses and only the edges are being caught. When you're increasing the brightness of your browns for your dry brushing, what you want to do is you want to get the next paint straight on your brush without washing it. Dab that into your tissue where the paint already is, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to not create strong contrasts. We sort of want it to be a nice little mix, so it's a gradual increase in brightness. So after I dry brush my Steel Legion Drab, I then dry brush in Tallarn sand. It's like a light grey brown, but you know, just a lighter brown will suffice. Once I'd done that, I'd just dry brush with Balor brown. And yeah, pretty nice effect. If you want a wet base, you could go over the whole thing in sort of like PVA, but I was happy with like a dryish forest, nothing spectacular. For the basing, I was going to use these green tufts from Army Painter, but personally I found the green ones to be a little bit too bright, so I actually start using some of the swamp tufts, put a few of those on. I start off with 2 green tufts, but I take that off. I also use what's called lichen or lichen. Reindeer moss, I think it might be another name for it. It's a weird thing to describe, but hopefully you can see it on the video. I just put some PVA down for that. For the tufts, they have like a sticky part on the bottom, so they might stick on their own. If they don't, you do want to use a little dab of super glue just to secure that to the base. But for the For the lichen, I just put a little bit of PVA. You could do super glue again, but just be careful with your fingers. I also put on like these dead leaves, but I'm not really sure that fits Endor, but it's just something I rocked with. Whatever basing materials you think you're going to like, then go with it. You know, you can get fake plants from the pet store or pound store or whatever it is and just put them on. You're just looking for some vegetation, basically. Nothing, you don't need to go overboard. You can use flock, as in like Woodland Scenics flock, and you can use static grass. A combination of the two is fine, just whatever, how much you want to spend on it, but you're just decorating your base up to look vaguely like a wooded or forest area. And that's pretty much it for the Endor style base, or the forest style base. Next we'll move on to the desert or Tatooine style base. We do exactly the same thing with the grit and with the sand at the start, nothing spectacular. I'm using super glue, you can use PVA. And then we move on to the first base colour. Now the base colour I'm going to be using for this one is Zandri dust. Just, you know, you don't want to use your new brushes on this, you sort of want to use your old brushes. Get just an old brush, cover the whole thing in Zandri dust, a little bit of water when you're mixing it, and you're good to go. Once that's dry, we're going to cover that again with Agrax Earthshade, just to darken the recesses, and Agrax Earthshade is brown, so it's not like it's going to go nicely with the like tan colour that we have for the base. Once the Agrax Earthshade is dried, we're going to again dry brush originally with Zandri dust. Then I highlight it up to a Ushabti bone, I think it's the name of the colour. And then finally I use a white, but the white I mix with the Ushabti bone just in the tissue, so it's not like a pure white, just to give it a nice little dusty, arid kind of feel. Again, I use the swamp tufts because the swamp tufts are actually sort of like, they look slightly like deadish grass, so in this case it fits. You can actually get dead grass for like static grass, but I didn't want to use that in this case. I just wanted to use the two tufts. And literally, that's the desert one done. It's just sand on the base, Zandri dust, a wash, highlighted up with lighter shades of sort of tan. Now we move on to Hoth, which is the snow base, which is does involve a little bit of an extra step, or a different step, I should say. We start off with the same thing, use PVA sand. However, I would recommend using super glue if you're going to use a large rock. Now, I had a large rock here that just completely fell off but later on because I didn't let it dry. But if you're patient and let everything dry, everything will stay. Then for the base layer of this, I'm going to cover it all in Eshin grey. You can use any sort of dark grey, but I use Eshin grey. Let that dry, of course. Now, I'm not going to do a wash on this one because I am going to cover it mostly in snow. So you don't necessarily need to do a wash here. For the first layer of the dry brush, I'm going to use Celstra grey. It's like a grey with maybe like a bluish tint, so it goes quite nicely in like a snow setting. And then I'm going to dry brush with Ceramite white. Again, mixing the two as you go. You don't want that stark contrast. Once I'd finished that, I do recommend that you put a bit of white paint where you want your snow. Now, for a nice mix of snow and ground, you wouldn't do too much snow in areas. You'd still want some of the ground to show. But because like I'm trying to replicate sort of like Hoth, I just completely like almost cover the whole thing in white, which is a bit silly, but just where I thought I'm going to put snow there. You don't necessarily need to do that because our snow flock itself is white, but I just find it makes it a little bit clearer, I guess, and the edges will blend together nicely when we put the flock down anyway. So you don't have to do that step, but it's just something I did. As for mixing our actual snow flock, I'm using Woodland Scenics snow flock, but you can get all different kinds of people do them. I think GeForce 9, probably Army Painter probably also do them. The way that I personally like to use it is I get some PVA, I get a bit of water, probably about 50-50 mix. Then I get my snow flock, and I'm sort of looking for like a toothpastey kind of gritty texture. Once you've got that, you want to use an old brush. Never use your new brushes on this kind of stuff. And we're just sort of going to brush it on into place. And we're looking for like a thick, not like a very thick texture, but you know, if you want like a really deep snowfall, you could go with a really thick texture. In this case, I'm just sort of like maybe like a millimeter thick, just all around where I wanted the snow. And that's pretty much it for this snow flock. once it's finished, you could do like a varnish if you wanted, or you could, in theory, go back over it with some PVA and sprinkle some of the flock over it. That's if you want like a fresh snowfall kind of feel. But that's pretty much it for all three. And that's pretty much it. It was all very simple. If you did use PVA instead of super glue, you would have to wait a little bit longer for the sand to dry. But obviously, I do recommend PVA because otherwise the super glue can get all over your fingers and that kind of stuff. These are very simple basing, very easy to do. I personally think like a based model looks better. You can go with clear bases if you like, but I don't really like just, you know, the base not being based at all. However, that's just my preference. Other people might disagree with that. As I said, very simple. 3 different biomes with suitable for Endor, Tatooine, Hoth classics. You know, that's the Star Wars kind of classics. And to be fair, a lot of table mats are like those anyway, so that's just the way that is. I think that's pretty much everything. There is one last thing. I just want to say there's a girl called Alex who I believe watches with her dad. She's not been very well lately, and I hope she's feeling much better as soon as possible. And must make an apology because she corrected me that I say Han Solo when it is in fact Han Solo, which is not very good for my English northern accent. But I will try and not do it going forward. Many apologies, and I hope you feel better soon. Other than that, if you did like the video, do like, share, subscribe, all that kind of good stuff. And as ever, have a most beautiful, beautiful day. Bye, guys.